Today's guest is Donald Grothoff. Donald is the mindset coach at Carolina's Natural Health Center as the EFT tapping practitioner. That's Emotional Freedom Techniques. That's EFT. Tapping practitioner and mindset coach. He helps patients going through their process of healing get past the anxiety, stress, emotional blocks, or traumas that stop them from getting the full potential of the amazing healing. He has one-on-one sessions where he uses his skills in EFT tapping, breath work, mindfulness practices, and much more. His work nurtures each patient to the next level in their healing process. When he's not at CNHC, he has his practice with his wife called Focus Healthy Family. They work together with parents who are dealing with children with behavior and anxiety issues. In that capacity, he's a speaker, EFT practitioner, and behavior transformation specialist along with his wife, Gina. Donald is passionate about helping patients and clients reach their best health level. And he says it's not just about healing the body, it's a path to a more conscious life. And with that, I'll go ahead and let Donald tell you a little bit more.
Well, I have a practice called Focus Healthy Family. I now work with my wife, Gina, and we focus towards helping parents. What we initially started out in combining our, because and I'll go into past, but we originally started out working with parents dealing with small kids, and now we're including that, but we're moving into what they call the sandwich generation, which is parents who are sandwiched between raising their kids, young kids, or even adult kids that they're still supporting in some way, and taking care of an aging parent. And what we want to do, the main focus is communication with both sides of that, and the emotional, stressful, all that side of it, helping people to change that and lower that. So that's what I do now in working with parents. Where my background, that's my way back background in my first career and stuff was in sales. So it had nothing to do with what I'm doing now. What kind of got me into this, where I look at the more important part, is because of my middle daughter, who had obsessive compulsive disorder. And it was a frightening time for us, very high anxiety. Just, she was rather abusive at 9 years old, trying to hit and kick and punch and scream and yell and break things. And so we had a lot of battles. And because of that, and we had to learn a lot about obsessive compulsive disorder and how to trying to find resources, people, professionals, all that kind of stuff. We figured when we got through that, we figured we thought could be useful for us to help other parents who might be into that place or going through that same thing. And so we decided to take into practice. Now, before that, I was in the tapping practice, the emotional freedom techniques tapping, on my own. And so we've just blended that concept, that tapping process, into our program that we work now with parents.
Okay.
So rough, and again, I had a heart attack in the midst of all that fun stuff with my daughter. And then once we got through all that and I made it past the heart attack and all that, we were now going through it a second time with my youngest daughter and her OCD, which she kind of got from the first one. So we're going through some of that same tough time with that now.
So a lot to unpack there. And
Yeah.
this is going to selfishly be probably a super helpful conversation for me, because my 84-year-old mom lives with me. My girlfriend is an exceptional education teacher. So she works with special needs kids all the time. And I hear stories that she shares about her day that touch on some of the things that you've talked about, kids that will act out and have
Rages.
rages, sometimes just trouble handling their emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And then her kids, they're now adults, they're 18 and 21, but kind of sort of feel like that sandwich effect myself, although I don't have any biological kids of my own. So something that you touched on that I want to unpack a little bit is you mentioned tapping.
Mhm.
And for those of us in the audience and even myself, tell us a little bit about what that is and how you use that in your practice.
Okay. Well, it's an alternative practice, of course. It's not there's no medical side to it, but it's a process to help reduce anxiety and calm somebody down and be able to help release some of the negative self-talk, the negative ideas that we ruminate over all the time. And basically what we're doing, I'll give you the analogy I use with my patients and clients that I work with on how to really understand what it's about. Um, if you think about the house you live in, the building you're in right now, there's energy coming into it, electricity coming into it. It comes in through a big wire, either above or below, and that energy has to be distributed out to all the appliances, the electrical computers, everything, air conditioner, and is done through the wires in the wall.
Okay.
Well, our body is the same thing, it's very similar in its actions, that we have energy flowing through us. That's what pumps our heart, pumps the lungs, gets all, and it's passing through us as you and I sit here right now. It's passing through us, and it too has to be distributed out to the cells, the organ, the brain, everywhere in the body. And so we within us, I call them invisible wires. They're called meridians or pathways of energy that help distribute that energy out to all those different places. And when we get into a negative place, we those pathways get messed up. And they're the thing that really support and begin the anxiety. That fight or flight is really what anxiety is. And so we're tapping on the end points with our fingers. Usually it's the index and the middle finger, I guess it would be. We're tapping on the different end points of those to calm them down, to get them back into alignment. Because as long as they're out of alignment, the messages aren't happening. If you think about it, we talk about we're like 95 to 98% of our brain is electricity.
Hmm.
And it's firing frequencies back and forth with messages. And if they're not coming through correctly, then it just, you can imagine it just messes up everything. So we're just doing this tapping process to help ease. We're tapping, and at the same time we're expressing. So it's kind of like acupressure meets or acupuncture meets talk therapy, and it's
Yeah,
very powerful.
I was going to
Very
ask you
powerful.
if it stemmed from acupuncture or acupressure, if that's part of the history of how it came about.
Same kind of principle.
Okay.
And using that, there was a doctor that came up with this idea of being able to tap on those instead of the pins. So
Okay.
yeah.
So this would be something I'm guessing that would be in the general umbrella of alternative medicine or alternative treatments. Would that is that
I mean,
how?
it's the all terminology. You could say
Okay.
alternative medicine. You could say alternative. Well, I can't call it therapy because I'm not licensed as a therapist,
Okay.
but it is very much like therapy. I mean, I just got off of a session with somebody that was dealing with childhood trauma, and we really were able to make some small breakthroughs, but some nice breakthroughs with it.
So how would you, this is something that comes up a lot in coaching. I think I mentioned to you in a conversation a while back that I've been through Tony Robbins' coaching program to learn
Hmm.
the coaching techniques that he teaches and he uses with clients. And one of the things that he's very big on is making sure that coaches are very clear with clients on the distinction between coaching and therapy, counseling, or anything that a mental health professional, someone who's like a licensed psychologist or psychiatrist or a medical doctor would do. And so one of the things that we talk about is that coaching is much more about just helping people find some of the answers. It's more almost a matter of leading people with questions to find some resources within them, right? Now,
Okay.
what you do with the tapping, obviously there's a physical component to that. How do you address, and I don't know if you get this a lot, but I know, for example, my college roommate is DO. He's a doctor of osteopathy, right?
Mhm.
They, for the most part, can do pretty much everything MDs can do. But when we were in college and he was an undergraduate, when he was looking at medical schools, DOs back in the day were looked at as less than an
Mm.
MD,
Yeah.
right? Because osteopathy as a practice, as a profession, was still looked at as kind of woo woo, for lack of a better term, back then, because it takes a little bit more of a holistic approach.
Yeah.
Do you ever get people that look at it that way, and how do you address people that look at it like maybe it's not as legit because they're used to the Western model of medicine and MDs, DOs, and that type of thing?
Yeah. Well, no, uh, my mentor she said, told me I was lucky because she said when she would present this EFT stuff, people would roll their eyes and they'd just walk away and and
Yeah.
at least with where I'm at right now with it is people have seen it and have heard about it. And so it isn't so voodoo to them, you know,
Okay.
but yeah, I mean, chiropractors were the same way too. They were
Yeah.
considered, charlatans or whatever, at some point. And so, yeah, we are. And, I it can be difficult at times because, but I mean, it does have science behind it. There's a lot of science behind it now. There's all kinds of studies. I mean, even the military uses it for PTSD. So
Hmm.
it's in like the top 10 of their different tools that they use for that. Um, Going to your coaching thing, I I I personally, and I'm not I never cared for the term coaching because I feel like what I do
Same
goes,
here.
yeah, it goes beyond that. Like I said, you know, I kid my clients and say I'm the guy that makes people cry because we're digging into emotions with me, and we're getting into sometimes some heavy stuff. Now, it doesn't mean I won't take on extremely heavy cases because I just don't. That's not my forte, I guess. Um, but I have had some that were really tough. Um, so I feel like um, what you did say though about you're about pulling things out, kind of having it come from them.
Yeah.
Well, that's the same thing with me. That's the part of coaching, I guess I could say I do agree with, as far as this is about them and it's about their words, not mine. When we're tapping and we're trying to express these negative emotions and words and thoughts and stuff like that, I want it to be them. And so,
Yeah.
I start the conversation out with it, and I do a lot from intuitive, just whatever comes to me is what I'm putting out there to draw out from them. And, because I'll even do, as we're tapping, I'll say something that I think is the complete opposite of what they're going through, just to
Hmm.
get them to go, well, no, wait a minute, that is, no, that's not right, and I'm like, okay, good, now we got it out, we got out what I wanted to hear from you, and
It's interesting.
it works. So yeah, that I just what when somebody approaches me and tells they don't really believe in this, I'll say, well, 20 some years ago, before I started this, I thought it was voodoo too.
Yeah.
My wife got me, one of these, oh, you need to go see them, to my, who was one of the master here that I actually trained under. And what I tell people now is like, look, I am not a scientist, even though I know there's scientific stuff behind it. I just know what I've seen and the work that I've done. And, I say, give it a try. And because like I said, I walked in there. I remember the first time I sat down in front of her, and I was just in my mind, I was going, this is ridiculous. Tapping, and then all of a sudden, poof, she was really good. She looked right through me and pulled out from me what stuff that I like, oh my gosh, and I felt so much better after working with her those first couple of sessions, especially. And so I give them the experience and say, this is what I've seen, and you can, if you don't want to believe it, don't. That's your choice. But if you want to change, I think it really can change you, and it does. So.
So this reminds me a little bit of a conversation. I saw an interview, and I think it was with Jocko Willink, the former Navy SEAL, and
Mhm.
he teaches a lot of leadership. And the interviewer was asking him. Apparently, he had done some joint interviews with Dr. Jordan Peterson, and the guy was asking him about the fact that they share a lot of beliefs in common about leadership, psychology, motivation, different things like that. And he asked him something along the lines of, "It seems like you agree with a lot of the things that Dr. Peterson talks about. What do you attribute that to?" And his answer was along the lines of, "I don't really attribute it to anything because most of what I teach is simply based on what I've used over my years of experience that I saw work." So Dr. Peterson comes from the academic world where he's had seen studies and research and all
Yeah.
that that sort of validate how and why it works. Jocko Willink came from the world where some mentor taught him something, he used it and it worked, and so he kept using it. And so he kind of answered it in terms of, I never knew why it worked. I just knew that it did. But it's kind of nice to know now that there's some of these academic folks who are kind of marrying what I've learned with the research out there that validates it. So now I can kind of actually explain to somebody why it works instead of just saying, I don't know why, I just know that it works.
Yeah.
Um, to the same point, a lot of Tony Robbins stuff, I don't know if you've seen this recently, but there's a Stanford study, and I don't know how long the study was, but they were studying his, I think it was the Date with Destiny, one of his big events that he does every year. And there were some remarkable stats they put out about how much more effective his techniques with the people that attended those things were than antidepressants and traditional therapy.
Yeah.
So it also reminds me of simple things like, and probably everyone's experienced this in one way or another, a parent or a grandparent telling them some anecdotal evidence about, and one that just popped to mind. My grandmother always used to say, eat lots of garlic because garlic is good for you, right? And as a kid, I used to think, what does grandma know? My grandmother never finished high school.
Yeah.
She wasn't very articulate in English because it was her second language. She didn't write very articulately. And lo and behold, 40, 50 years later, there's all of these academic studies showing, yeah, garlic actually is good for your circulation and all these other things and all the reasons why. Guess what? Grandma didn't have the science. She just knew from experience that it just worked for certain things, right?
Yeah.
Um, so for any of those of you that are watching or listening that might be a little hesitant, I would encourage you, and you said this yourself, just open your mind to it, give it a try. If you don't like it or if it's not for you, that's okay. But at least go into it with an open mind if it's something that sounds like it could be useful. And then something I learned years ago, hey, take the best and leave the rest. If they learn one thing from you that's helpful and the rest of it they still see as kind of something that isn't a good fit for them, that's okay too. Right?
Yeah.
If only one thing helps, at least
Yeah.
something helped. Um, so you mentioned a few different things that you use some of your techniques for. So I'm curious if you were to look at sort of the whole population of clients that you've helped your entire career in your practice, what would you say are some of the most common things that you help people with?
Well, and it, I'll use it as a segue into what what you do and what we're going to talk about, and that's communication. It's I've been just amazed at. Well, one is that one of the things we learned, and from my daughter, with that first scenario I went through with my daughter and all that rough stuff, is how communication can change the whole dynamics of the situation. I mean, because I had to learn, I had to learn it the hard way. Because I, when my daughter would come at me, it just this, she'd be screaming things at me, calling me names, doing all kinds of stuff. I would tend to match her, you know,
Mm,
and just think that that was going to be the effect or that was going to work. Um, and one of the things that my wife kind of pulled me to the side one day and she said, that is not working. You just end up climbing the wall together in anxiety and volume and everything else. And she said, and she said, we have to address our child with compassion, no matter
Mm.
what she's coming out with. She said, I want you to remember that within that wild child or that beast that's coming at you is your daughter who you love. And I want you to keep that in the back of your mind. And let's change how we communicate with her and how we handle her. And so it was so powerful. Honest to God, when these things happen, you could see the energy drop by 50% as long as I didn't, as I responded better to her.
So some of the things that you said they kind of tie together some of the things that I think about with communication. So when you talked about that you matched her, you mirrored her, that's like a classic. You take communication skills courses, and when they talk about getting in rapport with someone, matching and mirroring is like one of the first things that they talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what you just hit on emphasizes the importance of context and empathy,
Mm-hmm.
understanding that in certain contexts, matching their energy or matching their body language isn't the best thing. And it sounds like you needed to step back and think more about empathy and, okay, where's this coming from? Where's this energy coming from? And understanding that first before you picked a strategy of how to get into rapport to then communicate more effectively.
Well, let me clarify something because you've got a good point there. And what I want to add to that is, and this is something that my wife came back to me. There is a point when you can. It's really about the response, but there is a point. There's some kids and some people want you to match their energy, but it's how you do it. For instance, instead of me coming back going yeah, just get I could go, whoa, you are really really upset. Tell me
Okay.
more about that.
So
So
you're
I
still
matched
matching the
I
energy.
matched the level of that energy,
Uh-huh.
but with a response that wasn't matching the anger or matching the I don't know if that kind of makes sense, but that's one thing that makes a difference. So and some kids you don't have to, some kids you can come go, wow, you're really upset with me, even though they're up there. So it just kind of
Yeah.
depends on the person, what their style is or whatever. But yeah, that's a good point, that it is about matching the energy, but doing it in a way that's responding better, and it's not matching their anger or their frustration or whatever level they're at with that.
So this brings up a good point about uh, I don't know if it's techniques or more intuitive when you do this, but clearly there's a lot of experience that goes into your awareness of being able to sort of modulate or modify how you're using the combination of your energy, the words that you use, and how you're coming back with that communication. Would you say that the way you figure that out is more intuition, or are you leaning on specific techniques where, like a doctor might say, when I see this characteristic, I diagnose it as fill in the blank X, and then my prescription for that is Y, sort of based on like a step by step, or is it something that you feel like is more intuitive?
Well, I guess I'd say both in a way. So the way I learned it, and I've mentioned this book before, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. Um, my wife took that on before our first child was born. She was reading up as she had a book sitting on her belly with the first child. She was reading this book, and she was exploring all kinds of. She said, "I'm not going to teach my child junk. I'm not going to feed my child junk. I'm going, And so this book to me, it's so powerful, and it talks about different techniques, but it's just not theory. It tells you literally, do it. You can do it this way. You can try it this way. Anyway. She took that book on, and she used it with with our kids pretty much right off the bat. And it took me a while, the 2x4 to the head kind of sometimes, I think, to let it sink in. But give you the example when it did. She one time my oldest child, my son, who at that time was, I think he was probably around 10 or 11. He's now 25. Um, he came down the steps just really wailing on his sister. Something his sister did. They had gotten into argument. She did something, and just just the energy level, the anxiety level was up here. The energy was up here, and now I was happened to I'd be standing back. They didn't really see me necessarily, but I could watch. I was watching them. Now, if I would have been standing in front of him when he came down and did that, I probably would have responded with, "Oh, come on, it isn't that bad. Just go up and take care of it," kind of thing. My wife, with all her wonderful wisdom, she stepped back and she went, "Wow, you are really upset. I really want to know more. Tell me more about
Mm.
this." And I swear to God, he turned around, like looked behind him, like, "You talking to me?" But his energy level dropped by probably 30-40% at least. And he went, "Well," and he went on. And all through the conversation, all Gina did was go, "Huh, oh, wow, yeah, uh-huh." That's all she did. That was all her response. No fixing, no throwing out solution, no, none of that. At the end, she said, "Well, is there anything more? I just want to be clear." And he said, "No, I think that's it." And she said, "Well, what do you think you could do about it?" And he a little shocked. He went, "Well, I guess I can go up and talk to her." And my wife said, "Do you need me there to kind of referee or?" And he said, "No, I think I got it." Went upstairs. Of course, my mouth was on the floor. I'm like, what that was that?" And I mean, 5 minutes later, the two of them were up there laughing and giggling. And what we've always told clients is, what would you rather have, a 15-minute conversation or an hour-long battle? Because with my response would have been probably a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour of arguing or battling, somehow.
And was that strategy that she used, was that something that she learned directly from that book?
Yeah, that's the
Okay.
first chapter is dealing with a child's feelings.
Tell me the name of the book again and the author. I want to make sure we put it in the notes.
It's called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk.
And the
And
author?
the author is it's two ladies. Last names of Faber and Maslish.
Okay. I'll
It,
find it
it
and I'll put it in the show
it just
notes.
has these solid concepts to it, and like I say, it's really about listening to anybody. Here's where this has taken me, because yes, it was about children and how to deal with children, but I started using it in my adult world
That's
and
what I was getting ready to ask you
with my
about.
business, because the concepts behind them are, when people come at us with stuff, they more than likely, it's really not about us.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there are times, I will take rules, from my wife and stuff. I understand that, but so the idea behind this is that we got to give them a child, a person, a chance to let it out, to get
Hmm.
more than likely, they don't want a solution from you. They just want to be able to be heard. And that's what
Yeah.
that's about, is really taking the moments. These simple answers is one of their best. I think we have parents come back to us all the time going, "Wow, that really worked. I can't believe it." They see behavior changes, they see anxiety changes and communication changes, and they're back to building a relationship.
So as you were describing this, it reminded me of that expression that cobbler's children often have no shoes, right? Where as you're talking and I'm listening, I'm taking notes and I'm thinking, oh, well, what she did there with making that comment about him being upset, I've heard used as a technique called labeling. right? And you could walk
Hmm.
through all the science and the techniques behind it. But at the end of the day, I can cognitively, at a brain level, understand every single thing you just laid out. But then in my personal life, someone that I'm emotionally close to, that I have a close personal relationship with, all that stuff goes out the window because my own feelings now
Yeah.
get in the
Yeah.
way of all that. And in the
Uh,
moment, I forget all the techniques and I forget all about stepping back and separating myself from the emotion and thinking about, okay, what do I need to do here? Because I get caught up in the moment. And I wonder how many of your clients and the people in their personal lives, their friends and their family members, sometimes with the best intentions, they miss the mark on the communication. And then once they learn a few techniques, it becomes helpful. But then at some point, as I listen to you describe it, I could just imagine if I was there watching it, it would probably look almost like a magic trick if you don't know what's going on,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Once somebody explains to you, it's kind of like if you were there's a YouTube channel that I became aware of about a year ago called the Behavior Panel, and it's these four behavior experts. And what they do on their channel is they'll show a short video clip, sometimes just 15 seconds, maybe 30 seconds, sometimes of an interview or a press conference, right? And they'll just show it to the audience. And then all four of these experts, they'll break down all these different things they observed in the behavior of the person on the clip, and they'll kind of analyze it. And then they'll play it back again. And the first couple of times I watched it, when I watched them play it back the second time after they'd analyzed it, it was like I had a new set of eyes
Hmm.
because they'd explain everything and it seemed almost like a magic trick because it was like watching a magician do a trick and then having him show you how it was done and then showing you again. And when you watch it the second time, you go, I saw it. I saw what you did there, but you couldn't see it the first time because you didn't know what you were looking at.
Yeah. Yeah.
And with
Well,
a
that
lot of this, it feels like that to people, I'm guessing.
well, and that's why we actually do workshops on the book, because it gives a chance for, because it takes practice. I still screw up. I still, I've gotten so much better at it, but and that's just human, you know. Any parent knows that you get, they just hit your last straw,
Yeah.
and so you blurred out. What we've learned, part of learning communication is then being able to go back to your child and say, hey, I really messed up, and talking through it with them and apologizing and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, no, most, like I said, especially when I talk about those simple answer kind of responses, a lot of the parents kind of roll their eyes and go, yeah, I just don't know if that's going to work. But what they do, they'll come back 2 weeks later and go, oh my gosh, I tried that just out of the blue, just figured what the heck, and it worked. I didn't get into a a battle. She didn't get into a tantrum. And so they realize it takes work, it takes effort. And see what you were talking about when you're dealing with a special needs child. Oh, it's like when my daughter would come at me, I'd take that stuff personally. She would yell and
It's hard
scream
not
at me,
to.
you're not my father, I hate you, and she would sometimes use some language. I don't know where she got that from, but anyway, and that was really hard. You suck it in, and it's your daughter telling you this, your
Yeah.
family. So it's a thing you have to kind of train yourself to go. I'm not going to. I talk to my clients about building a shield that
Mm.
allows me to go. I'm not taking that in today. Nope, 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 nope. That's their stuff, not mine. That's their stuff, not mine.
When you're working with your client, are you typically working with the kids and the parents together, or do you do it
Well,
separate, or
I
is
have we work more now with parents. I like working with kids. I like working with teenagers too. And I've worked with all of that. And depending on the age, if the child is like 8 or below, I'll work together, and I'll really try to teach the parent how to, because it's something that I can teach them how to do it and they can do it.
right? That's
This very self, I don't know what you'd call it. You can do it yourself. Um,
yeah, and that's partly what made me ask because with coaching, like coaching adults, for example, one of the mistakes that I caught myself making um, early on was I used to be an accountant, so I'm very detail oriented, right? And I always want to know why. I always want to understand the why behind everything. And so sometimes I would catch myself where I might be working with somebody and coaching them through something, and then I would start explaining sort of the technique and how it works and everything. And I realized that sometimes that can be counterproductive
Hmm.
because sometimes it's too much information, it's overwhelming. And in the moment, it might be better just to help them get through this issue. Maybe later, if at all, you could come back and maybe explain the whys and the techniques. But sometimes it's better just to get them through it. And if you're going to do any teaching at all, do it later so that it's not overwhelming. But I could see where if you're working with kids and parents, it seems almost like you almost have to teach the parents,
Yeah.
not just help the kid and fix it one time, but show the parents the techniques so that that can be something in their toolkit. So when you're not around, they can handle it on their own.
Well, and as an example, this, like I say, the session I had right before I came on with you, um, the talking to the person, they start getting emotional really quickly, and we we just touched on one part of something that was going on for them, and they got real emotional. And usually I'll do some explaining on the tapping and all, but I said, okay, let's do this. I want you to tap here. I want you to take a couple of good deep breaths, and I just want you to kind of let yourself relax a little bit. And I want you to just try to let go, And so I did a little bit of tapping to get her back down off that, out of those emotions, so that we could talk better, so it was more clarity. So yeah, there I jumped in. And then I do a brief explanation of it. I don't go into, well, I kind of told you that the house thing idea, I give them that
Mhm.
analogy just so I can get a concept of it. And then we get into, well, the first thing we get into is really talking through what's going on for them, so we can kind of dig into what are the thoughts or the messages that are triggering them, and then we start doing the tapping process on those things.
So let's back up a second because I'm not sure. Um, I feel like we got a little deeper on a couple of things, and maybe I wasn't listening as well as I should have. But remind me again, what are the most common issues that you help your clients with?
Oh yeah, we did get caught quite off the track on that one, didn't
Yeah,
we?
that's okay though. It was great. It was good stuff.
Well, like I said, communication's the one of the big ones, because especially when I'm talking with parents, and then of course the emotional and the tapping part of it is to me, well, that's what I'm trained in. That's where my training is. So um, I, I would say, those two are big topics that I hit with just about every client that comes in, because I think they're that powerful, and how that communication can change a lot of stuff, a lot their relationship, everything. Um, but I talk to them about, we go into mindfulness and talk about consciousness, because what I like here, I work at I'm in a program with a naturopathic doctor. In fact, that's the office I'm in right now. And people come in, of course, he's a doctor. So they're coming in, they've tuned into their body and realize something's wrong, that something's not working right. And my job is really to have them tune in up here,
Hmm.
because this is running this. And if this
So for
isn't
those just
working right,
listening, Don's pointing to his head and his heart.
oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't think about it.
That's okay. We're on a bunch of different platforms, so some people might be just listening.
Okay. But yeah, so that's part of what I do too, is that because it all blends together then, because it's communication to yourself, how you're talking to
Yeah,
yourself, and then how we get through it is by learning to change that communication and using the tapping to do that with. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but those are kind of I'd say
kind
the
of.
three big areas that I work with every patient on, or every client.
So I'm curious. Do you get? You mentioned OCD. Um, and I'm curious if also if you've touched on any techniques or things that help people like with ADD or ADHD, because I know that's A very common issue for a lot of people.
Well, yeah. So we might have to get a little bit technical because fight or flight, which is what anxiety is, all right, it does stuff to you. In your body, it pumps up chemicals like cortisols and adrenalines that
Hmm.
are made to really get us strengthened for a real fight, a physical fight.
Right.
Okay. And in our brain, what it's doing is it's shutting down non-essential parts of our brain. In other
Okay.
words, it's imagining that we're going after a tiger, let's say. We got to fight a tiger. So it only needs the parts, like the instinctual parts it needs for fighting. So it's
Hmm.
shutting down other parts, the non-essential stuff. And two of the big things that it really works against is the immune system
Mm.
and the more upper thinking parts of the brain. It'll hinder them or shut them down if it's really, really major. It's because if you think about anybody that's in anxiety, they can't think straight, they got foggy mind,
Yeah.
all of this. I believe that has a lot of play in the ADHD, the ADD, because that they're not thinking straight, they're not foggy, all that kind of stuff. So if I can help reduce the anxiety part of that, which I think is a good majority of it, but that can really help in getting more clarity and getting more clear on things. And not saying that it resolves ADHD, but it can make it worse, less powerful, I guess. I don't know how that
Yeah. I
that
guess the way I've heard people talk about ADHD is that it's not something that you're going to cure, but
yeah,
you can learn different techniques to help manage it so that it creates fewer problems for you,
yeah.
right?
And
So
that's what
it's not going to go away, but you can just learn how to deal with it better. Um,
the
and
OCD is the same way. OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, is the same thing. It doesn't fully go away. It's how you manage it. And that,
something you said reminded me. One of the guys on that YouTube channel I was talking about, the behavior panel, this guy named Chase Hughes talks about that sometimes he will tell people that if you're trying to influence someone, really what you're doing is you have to think about being a chemist and an electrician, because the things that trigger behaviors are chemicals that our own body is dumping into our system, like you mentioned, like cortisol or epinephrine. There's all these different chemicals that our own body makes, and some things will trigger us for our body to dump some of those chemicals. So, as an example, someone gets upset, and like when they break down and they do analysis of people's body language, a lot of times what they're looking for is when someone's being deceptive. And one of the key indicators they look at is what's that guy, Murdoch, the guy that's been in the news that was accused of killing his wife and his son. They were breaking down one of the videos where he was crying, and he was describing some things about what had happened, and he was crying. And then one of the police officers asked him a question, and he just immediately stopped crying, turned around, and his entire body language changed. And they were pointing out that that seemed like deceptive behavior, because when you're genuinely distraught, your body is kicking out chemicals that are triggering these physical reactions of crying and shallow breathing and all these different things. And those chemicals have a half-life, right? So if you just got a shot of epinephrine, you can't immediately just stop feeling that energy because
yeah,
you want to direct yourself somewhere else. Those chemicals are driving your behavior, right? And so a lot of times what creates those problems in personal relationships is, let's say I'm using myself. I get upset and now all these chemicals get dumped, and maybe epinephrine or adrenaline is one of them. And it makes me excited. And then my brain says, John, you need to calm down and we need to talk about this other thing to be more productive. But those chemicals have me all excited and my energy is up. And so sometimes the best thing to do, for me, as using myself as an example, is to disengage and go, you know what? Give me a few minutes. I just need to take a walk and kind of blow off some steam and calm down. And I'm literally just letting those chemicals run their course
yeah,
to kind of
yeah,
work them out of my system. and then come back when now I'm in a little more calmer state of mind, that's next to impossible for me to do without just letting it sort of run its course.
Yeah,
Um,
it's interesting because I'm not doubting that at all, but I've seen some of that quick change kind of thing though happen, because like one of the techniques we use with my youngest now, and she goes into some rages, is we try to get her to count things in the room or name things in the room or name colors or something. And it isn't like a light switch going off necessarily, but within a few very short period of time, she will have calmed down. So I'm
yeah.
not sure what that means. I
Well,
don't
it sounds
disagree that there's times when it doesn't. And
well, and
maybe
so
go
here's
ahead.
a key that same guy talks about is there when it comes to behavior, there are almost no absolutes,
Yeah,
right? So they always talk about baselining and looking for patterns and changes in patterns, right?
yeah,
So baselining meaning talking to that person enough that you get a feel for their baseline behavior, right? So some
hmm
people, for example, they may just use ums and uhs, what we call filler words, just as their baseline. They just use it all the time.
hmm
Whereas someone else who doesn't use those all the time, and then you start asking them about something, and all of a sudden they start using them, that's a deviation from their baseline. So for one person, it's a red flag, whereas for the other person, that's just like
yeah,
baked into their normal behavior.
yeah,
Um, and then the other thing too, what you talked about sounds to me like what Tony Robbins would call like a pattern interrupt. The
hmm
asking them to count or look for colors, you're literally just interrupting the focus
yeah,
that
yeah,
had them in that pattern of being upset or whatever that emotion was. And sometimes just that simple pattern interrupt is enough to at least get them started
yeah,
down a different path where now that it's a little easier then to work with them on whatever the issue is because they're not so focused on the thing that got them into that pattern.
yeah, yeah.
So
No, that's it's interesting. Like you say, there's probably no exact right answer on that either way.
yeah.
So
So let me backtrack. Um, I'm kind of curious. I'm always curious, especially with someone like yourself that's in a profession now that you were saying you were in sales before, right? So this totally different than what you did before. If we were to go in the Wayback Machine, all the way back to when you were a kid, was there anything that you remember as a young child that you wanted to be when you grew up?
uh, well, I'll tell you this. I I went through a lot of different things as a child. I think chef and well, at first wanted to be an auto designer. I wanted to design cars, but
Okay.
one of the things I used to do, was raised Catholic, so and I loved the sermons that the priest would give, especially sermons that we used to have this priest at our church that he would get away from the podium and come down and walk around in the crowd kind of thing, talk and doing his sermon, which I thought was really cool and it was very relatable and all that kind of stuff. So as a kid, I can still remember this. I used to we had this big window fan. My dad was an electrician and stuff, and we had this big window fan. We'd put it up in the window during the summer, but in the winter it would sit down. And I remember for some reason it was up in our living room. And there was this one day, I think my mom was downstairs doing laundry, so I I got behind that window fan and I preached my little arms off. I mean, I was just going at it. And I still, even to this day, would love to be a minister or something just for those sermon part of it. The rest of it, I don't. But it's just like, so I knew I wanted to be a speaker. I knew, I
Okay.
think that was and I've been part of Melissa's speaker league and all that stuff. So, and that I love getting in front of a group. I love talking to groups. In fact, that's what I'm trying to do now is get back out and start talking again, like about the sandwich generation and all that stuff. So, yeah, so that there was part. Well, my mom was one that she wanted each of her boys to be priests,
Hmm.
and three of my brothers went to seminary, but came out. So I guess that was put into my brain that might be an option for me, but no, I grew out of that really fast when I realized I liked girls and I didn't want to be celibate. So
Yeah, that's a pretty big part of that whole
yeah,
deal. Yeah.
yes.
So before you got into what you're doing now, though, you mentioned that you were in sales. What type of
Yeah,
sales?
I was in food sales for about, I don't know, about 13 years, I guess, something like that. I was a food rep for calling on distributors with and selling. I sold ice cream. I sold uh, packaging. Um, I sold hot dogs with Oscar Mayer. Got to play on the Wienermobile, all that kind of good stuff. I sold Breyer's ice cream, which was one of my favorite jobs in the whole world, and I loved ice cream. And um, so yeah, and then I decided when I after I got married, we had been married for a while. We were looking at having kids. I decided I was tired of traveling because I was traveling a lot with it,
Hmm,
and so I went into I s- fell into web design and developed my own web design company and
interesting.
I did that for I don't know how many years. I did that for probably about 10 years, I guess, and I was really getting burnt out in it. And when I had my heart attack, my mentor, who I had been working with for a couple of years, had always told me, I think you'd really be good at this. You should think about it, And I always put it in the back of my mind. But after the heart attack, I said, I'm not going to do this. I got so fed up with, one more about us page, and I was going to explode.
And
So
is that what you were doing before you made the transition into what you're doing now,
yeah,
the
because
web design? Okay.
I had moved it into really consulting for like social media and web design and all of that. Because I had sold my original design business, and so I decided to go just into consulting and kind of go into the social media and all of that marketing side of it. And like I said, it was just I was burnt on it, and it was time. Eh, I always called my heart attack the 2x4 to the head that made me go, okay, enough. I've been told to do this many times before, and I didn't listen. So
So you mentioned the mentor. Was your mentor telling you that you should be doing the web design thing or doing what
no,
you're
no,
doing
no.
now?
Being a practitioner of the
Okay.
tapping, what she did, and she was also a trainer of it. So I did my training under her and one other master of it.
So mentors is something that I have a huge interest in because most of my mentors have been more indirect in the form of like books and seminars and things like that. How did you connect with the mentor that you were just talking about in the first place? How did that come
Well,
about?
I told you, my wife dragged me kind of. I don't know if I'd say dragged me screaming and screaming and shouting, but I was having a bunch of issues with my mom and my family stuff, and it was just stressing me out. And she had run into this person. I think she did a talk at one of the churches we went to or something, and she said, I really think this would be helpful. I just got this sense about her. And I said, oh, come on, what that doesn't make any. But I went, and I'm glad I was so glad I did because she was wonderful, and she still is. I haven't been around her much lately, but she just she's just it's hard to describe. I've got in my life I believe I have a list of like about 10 or 15 people in my life that I believe everybody should meet, and she's one of those. That
Someone
there's
like
just
them
some
or literally that exact person?
well, that exact person,
Okay.
if they could, because just being around them, the energy is, I'm sure you've been around people like that too, where there's
Yeah.
just something about them that empowers you almost. And she's one of those that does that.
And so what was the specific training? Tell me a little bit about the specific training that you did to become what you are now in your profession.
Well, first it's teaching all the techniques and that's what she would do is that they have different variations of techniques. They have a thing called the movie technique, which you run somebody through a movie as they're tapping. of their life or of the situation. So there's multiple. There's about, I don't know. I'd say there's probably 8 or 9 different techniques within the tapping range that they teach you, and then you practice with them, and then you're required to do. I'm trying to remember. I want to say it was $100 hours per the 2 of the levels of the second and third level. You had to do 100 hours of just getting a client in and running through and trying the different techniques and stuff like that with them. Um, that and then reading, and there's CDs and all that stuff. I had to go through a whole series of CDs from the original person that developed the program.
So it sounds like there's a lot of both academic learning concepts and as well as the application.
Yeah, there
Yeah.
were multiple books I had to read and go through, and like I say, the different videos and CDs and stuff that I had to listen to and watch. And like I say, just in-person training with her,
Right.
and then like I say, going through practice rounds with her, and then like I say with the clients.
So with what you do, what would you say is one of the misconceptions that people have about what you do?
Well, I mean, I had a lady once. I've done work at schools because it can really help kids with their increase their grade level and increase their reading abilities and stuff like that. And I remember one mother calling the principal of the school, who was friends of mine, and said, "I do not want my child in there with that guy hypnotizing everybody."
They didn't even know what you do.
Yeah, and then of course now, and the religious side of it, I have people come in and they ask me what I believe, and I don't want to share that with people. That's my thing, but they're
Mhm.
afraid that I'm going to somehow alter, bring, draw them to some kind of cult, or draw them off of their religion or their
Mm.
belief in God, and so what I tell them is, I'm not here to change any type of belief except the ones that you don't feel are working for you. So I'm not
Yeah.
here to draw you to this belief or draw you to this belief. It's what's not working for you. If there's a belief that's not working for you, that's not helping you, you know. So
Yeah, that actually sounds like one of the core things that in that Tony Robbins coaching program that they talked about different as a differentiating factor between coaching and counseling or working with a healthcare professional, which is the typical model in healthcare, is the first thing that you have to do. If you think about psychologists, for example, the first thing you have to do is diagnose the person, right?
mhm,
So for a psychologist, they've got that big book, the DSM-5, and it's all the different diagnoses that a practitioner can label someone with. But you can't prescribe anything to quote unquote fix a problem until you diagnose and define the problem. Whereas with coaching, at least the approach that I was taught, it's much more about what you want more of,
mhm,
right? It's not saying you're broken in this way. You have this X problem that has this label of Y that's in this book. And then that leads me now to what I'm going to prescribe for that. It's much more asking questions to find out, what are you here for in the first place,
mhm,
right? You sought out a coach for some particular reason. What's that reason? Asking questions to better understand it, and then figuring out, based on my training and my knowledge, how can I help that person lead them towards more of what they want,
yeah.
which is very, very different from a typical sort of medical model of diagnose and then prescribe.
Well,
So
I mean, and I've worked with doctors. I've got a doctor, a female doctor who I've worked with, known for a long time. And, she just got tired. She's an integrative doctor. She went and did a bunch of training in integrative medicine and integrative natural ways of, doing it. And she just said, they expected me to diagnose, treat, and take care of somebody and prescribe something in like 7 to 10 minutes or less.
yeah,
And she said, I couldn't. I didn't get to know them. I didn't get to know what was going
Yeah.
on for them, any of that, so no, because what I tell people, like even in this program that I'm in with the naturopathic doctor for wellness, I talk about this program isn't really just about healing the body. I said that I really believe, I believe this with my whole heart, that what I do and what we do here with this program is leading people to a more conscious life. And when I always kind of disclaim that with the idea, the idea of consciousness is such a fluffy, uh, esoteric kind of term that people, I talk about it's tuning into yourself. They tuned into their body to know there's something wrong. It was time to tune in here. And I think you know, that's kind of what my way of looking at where do we want to go. And I
Mm,
just, what I look at is what's stopping you from going that way, you know, and that I want to get rid of those blocks so you can move forward. You
right.
can move down that direction.
Makes
So yeah,
sense.
yeah.
So we're right about at the hour mark. I want to make sure I respect your time here. One of the things that I asked you about before we started recording was if there are any things that you and your business offer as far as something that anyone might be able to take advantage of. And one of them you mentioned is like a free initial consultation. So could you talk a little bit about what usually happens with someone that comes in just for that free initial consultation?
Well, and I don't offer this a lot. I just, when I'm in a situation like this, I love to offer that. Um, but we sit down and we really talk about what's going on for them. They don't have to get too in depth with it, but I want to make sure that they feel comfortable with me. And of course, the same thing, I feel comfortable with them as far as, am I a right fit for them and are they a right fit for what I do?
Mhm.
Um, and then if after talking with them, if I can realize that I would be a fit, and this is some of the things I think the path we can go down with this, and where it might lead you. I try to find out, really what's their outcome they want to get to. And then I will do maybe a little bit of tapping just to show them. But the tough part about that is, I usually make my consults like anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes. So
Okay.
you can't really do a decent tapping session in 15 to 20 to 30 minutes. It really needs an at least an hour to make it to get to a point of showing some results.
Okay, so it sounds like that first session would be just kind of feeling out whether it's a fit for the two of you to work together on the things that they
Hmm.
want to work on. That makes
Yeah.
sense. So, what is the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Well, they would go to my website, which is focusedhealthyfamily.com. That's focused with an ED.
Hmm.
And there's contact information there. Um, there's a guide up there, a family guide, a tapping guide. There's tapping information up there. And they
Okay.
can connect with me there. My email's pretty simple. It's don@focusedhealthyfamily.com. So they
Okay.
can email me if they mention this show, this podcast. We can do that consult, and like I said, they can get a free consult, and I will give them time to just address what they need, what they got going on, and see if it works.
And speaking of podcasts, you have a podcast as well, right?
Yeah, we have
What?
Focused Healthy Family podcast with I do with my
Okay.
wife, and it's focused around parenting. Where, like I say, we're moving into the sandwich generation, and because, like I say, this communication, when we're in that sandwich generation, you're dealing with, they're kind of reverting, the aging is reverting back to childhood. And so you're almost talking to
Hmm.
them like you do a child. So this whole thing just blended so well together. So we're really doing a lot of focus on that. And it's been a really cool thing to do. I'm sure you enjoy doing this. It's fun to talk to people and,
Oh, it's a blast.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I love, and I mentioned this at the beginning, that some of the questions I'm asking are kind of selfish because what you do and some of the topics that we talk about, I have a personal interest in hearing the answers to some of the things that we talked about. So I get a chance to learn a lot, ask questions, and I think the biggest thing for me is I'm naturally a very curious person. So this is a great outlet for me. Um, Well, with that, I want to go ahead and wrap up. Don, I want to thank you for your time. I almost feel like we could do a whole other interview about what you just touched on, which is the parent side of that sandwich that you talked about. So maybe somewhere down the road, we could do a part 2 and we could
Yeah,
explore that a little
I'd
bit.
love to. Yeah, because we're getting out right now trying to talk about it. So that would, yeah, anytime. I appreciate you, John. I enjoy I enjoy you as a person and talking with you, and this is a great podcast. So thank you.
Everyone, we will see you next time. Don't forget to tune in. We put these episodes out once a week on Fridays. All right, we'll see you all next time.